Maya Rodriguez had always been different from the others in her military unit. While her fellow soldiers were tall and muscular, she stood barely 5 feet 4 inches and weighed less than most of their equipment packs. Her voice was soft, almost whisper-like, and she had a habit of observing everything around her with intense focus that made some people uncomfortable. When Maya first arrived at the elite special operations training camp in Nevada, the other recruits couldn't hide their surprise. They had expected someone who looked like the action heroes from movies. Broad shoulders, intimidating presence, and a voice that could command attention across a battlefield. Instead, they got Maya, who looked like she belonged in a library rather than a combat zone. The training facility was known for breaking even the strongest candidates. Located in the harsh desert landscape, it pushed every recruit to their absolute limits. The days started before sunrise with brutal physical conditioning, followed by weapons training, tactical exercises, and survival challenges that would test both mind and body. From day one, Maya struggled with the physical demands. During the morning runs, she fell behind the pack, her small legs working twice as hard to keep up with the longer strides of her teammates. When they did strength training, she could barely manage half the weight that others lifted easily. Her shooting accuracy was decent, but nothing spectacular that would earn respect from her peers. The other recruits, led by a cocky soldier named Derek Martinez, began making jokes about Maya during mealtimes. They would snicker when she struggled to carry heavy equipment, or when she had to ask for help reaching something on a high shelf. Derek, who stood 6 feet tall and had muscles that looked carved from stone, seemed to take particular pleasure in pointing out Maya's shortcomings. "Hey, Rodriguez," Derek would call out loud enough for everyone to hear. "Maybe you should transfer to the kitchen duty. I heard they need someone who can reach the bottom shelves." The dining hall would erupt in laughter, and Maya would quietly continue eating her meal, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. During combat training exercises, the mockery continued. When Maya was paired with stronger opponents for hand-to-hand combat practice, she would often end up on the ground within seconds. Her teammates would shake their heads and mutter comments about how she was wasting everyone's time. Some even suggested that she had only made it this far because the military was trying to meet some kind of diversity quota. The worst part wasn't the physical challenges or even the verbal taunts. It was the way her fellow soldiers would look at her with a mixture of pity and annoyance, as if her presence somehow diminished their own achievements. They treated her like a burden, someone who would slow them down when it really mattered. Maya's bunk was positioned next to Sarah Chen, another recruit who was one of the few who didn't actively participate in the teasing. Sarah noticed how Maya would lie awake at night, staring at the ceiling, probably wondering if she had made a terrible mistake by pursuing this path. Sometimes Sarah could hear quiet sniffles coming from Maya's direction. Though Maya never showed any sign of crying during the day, the training instructor seemed indifferent to the social dynamics among the recruits. They were focused on identifying who had the physical and mental toughness to make it through the program. Sergeant Williams, the lead instructor, was a no-nonsense veteran who had seen countless recruits come and go. He evaluated everyone based on performance metrics and didn't seem particularly concerned with hurt feelings or wounded pride. As weeks passed, Maya's determination never wavered. Even as her confidence took hit after hit, she would get up before everyone else to practice shooting at the range, hoping to improve her scores. She spent extra time in the gym, trying to build strength that seemed to come naturally to others. Her efforts were genuine and relentless, but progress was slow and often went unnoticed by her peers. The psychological pressure was immense. Every mistake Maya made was magnified and remembered, while her small successes were quickly forgotten. When she successfully completed a navigation exercise or showed improvement in her tactical knowledge, Derek and his followers would find ways to diminish her achievements. "Lucky guess," Derek would say when Maya correctly identified an enemy position during a simulation. "Even a broken clock is right twice a day." Maya began to doubt herself. She wondered if everyone was right, if she really didn't belong here. The dreams she had of serving her country and proving that size and strength weren't the only measures of a soldier's worth seemed foolish now. She started to question whether her instructors back in basic training had made a mistake in recommending her for this elite program. But something deep inside Maya refused to quit. Perhaps it was stubbornness, or maybe it was the memory of her father, who had served in the military and taught her that true strength comes from refusing to give up when things get difficult. Whatever it was, Maya continued to push forward, even when every logical part of her mind told her to pack up and transfer to a different unit. The other recruits interpreted her persistence as either admirable stupidity or dangerous denial. They couldn't understand why someone who was so obviously outmatched would continue to subject herself to daily humiliation. Some of them started to respect her tenacity, even if they doubted her abilities. As the training program progressed and became more intensive, Maya found herself increasingly isolated. She ate meals alone, trained by herself whenever possible, and spent her free time studying tactical manuals and military history. She was becoming an expert in areas that didn't require physical strength. But her teammates were too focused on her obvious weaknesses to notice her growing knowledge and strategic thinking abilities. The stage was being set for something that none of them could have predicted. Maya's quiet observations, her careful study of every lesson, and her unique perspective were developing into skills that would soon prove invaluable. But for now, she remained the target of mockery, the weak link that everyone assumed would eventually break under pressure. The mockery reached its peak during a particularly challenging week of advanced tactical training. The recruits were divided into small squads and given complex scenarios that required teamwork, quick thinking, and flawless execution. Maya found herself assigned to a squad with Derek, Sarah, and two other soldiers named Marcus Thompson and Jake Sullivan. Derek immediately took charge of the group. Despite the fact that no official leader had been appointed, his commanding presence and obvious physical capabilities made the others naturally defer to his judgment. Maya tried to contribute ideas during their planning sessions, but her suggestions were either ignored or dismissed with barely concealed irritation. "Look, Rodriguez," Derek said during one particularly tense planning session, "why don't you just focus on staying out of the way when the action starts? The rest of us will handle the real work." Marcus and Jake nodded in agreement while Sarah remained silent, clearly uncomfortable with the dynamic, but unwilling to speak up. The first major exercise was a hostage rescue simulation. The squad had to infiltrate a mock compound, neutralize several armed opponents, and extract civilians without any casualties. Maya had spent hours studying the building plans and had identified several potential entry points that the others had overlooked. When she tried to share this information, Derek cut her off. "We're going in through the main entrance," he declared, fast and aggressive. "It's what works." Maya tried to explain that her analysis showed multiple vulnerabilities in that approach, but Derek's voice rose over hers. "Nobody asked for a book report, Rodriguez. This is about action, not theory." The exercise was a disaster. Derek's aggressive approach triggered alarms that alerted all the opponents to their presence. What should have been a quiet infiltration turned into a chaotic firefight. Two of the hostages were declared killed in the crossfire, and Jake was marked as wounded when paint rounds struck his leg. The squad failed the mission completely. During the debriefing, Sergeant Williams was harsh in his criticism. He pointed out every tactical error, every missed opportunity, and every moment where better planning could have prevented failure. Maya sat quietly, knowing that her suggested approach might have succeeded but unwilling to create more conflict within her squad. After the sergeant dismissed them, Derek was furious. Instead of accepting responsibility for his poor leadership, he looked for someone else to blame. His eyes fixed on Maya with undisguised anger. "This is what happens when we have dead weight on the team," he announced loud enough for other squads to hear. "Rodriguez throws off our whole rhythm. We're trying to operate like professionals, and we've got someone who belongs in an office job dragging us down." The accusation was completely unfair, but it stuck. Other recruits began nodding and whispering among themselves. Maya had become a convenient scapegoat for the squad's failure, even though she had been ready to contribute valuable intelligence that could have changed the outcome. The pattern continued through several more exercises. Derek would develop plans that relied heavily on brute force and intimidation tactics. Maya would identify problems with these approaches and suggest alternatives based on careful analysis of the scenarios. Her input would be rejected, the missions would encounter preventable difficulties, and she would somehow end up being blamed for the poor results. The psychological warfare against Maya intensified. During mealtimes, Derek and his supporters would make loud comments about how certain people weren't cut out for military service. They would discuss hypothetical combat scenarios and wonder aloud how soldiers who couldn't pull their own weight would endanger everyone around them. In a real firefight, Marcus would say while looking directly at Maya. You need to know that everyone on your team has your back. You can't worry about protecting someone who can't protect themselves. Maya's confidence continued to erode under this constant assault. She began second-guessing her every decision and movement. During physical training, she would push herself to exhaustion trying to keep up, often making mistakes that only provided more ammunition for her critics. Her shooting accuracy, which had been steadily improving, started to decline as stress and self-doubt affected her concentration. Sarah Chen watched all of this with growing discomfort. She had served in regular army units before qualifying for special operations training, and she had seen how toxic group dynamics could destroy unit cohesion. What was happening to Maya was wrong, but Sarah wasn't sure how to address it without making herself a target. One evening, Sarah approached Maya as she sat alone reading tactical manuals in the common area. Maya looked up with tired eyes that held a mixture of determination and defeat. You know they're wrong about you, right? Sarah said quietly, sitting down across from her. Maya closed her book and sighed. Are they? Maybe they see something I don't want to admit about myself. I've been watching during these exercises, Sarah continued. Your ideas are usually better than Derek's. The problem is that nobody listens long enough to understand what you're saying. Maya shook her head. It doesn't matter if my ideas are good if I can't make people respect them. In the field, that could get people killed. Sarah wanted to argue, but she could see that Maya's confidence was too shattered to be rebuilt with simple encouragement. The damage ran deep, and it would take something dramatic to change the squad's perception of their smallest member. The instructors had been observing these dynamics as well, though they rarely interfered with the social aspects of training. They understood that military units had to learn to work together under pressure, and sometimes that meant working through personality conflicts and leadership challenges. However, Sergeant Williams had begun to notice patterns in the exercise failures that suggested problems beyond simple tactical mistakes. He started paying closer attention to the planning phases of missions, listening to conversations that the recruits thought were private. What he discovered was troubling. One recruit was consistently providing sound tactical advice that was being ignored by the rest of the squad. Even more concerning, that same recruit was being systematically undermined and scapegoated for failures that weren't her fault. Williams had seen this kind of dynamic before in his 20-year military career. Sometimes the most valuable soldiers were the ones who didn't look the part, who brought different perspectives and skills that complemented traditional military strengths. He had learned to look beyond surface appearances and focus on results and potential. As Maya continued to endure daily humiliation and doubt, the stage was being set for a test that would reveal everyone's true capabilities. The final phase of training was approaching, and with it would come challenges that would require all of the skills that Maya had been quietly developing while her teammates focused on tearing her down. The final phase of training began with an ominous announcement from Sergeant Williams. The remaining recruits would face their ultimate test, a 5-day survival and tactical exercise in the unforgiving Nevada desert. Unlike previous exercises, this one would involve live ammunition, real environmental dangers, and minimal instructor oversight. The stakes were as close to actual combat as training could get. This exercise will determine who completes the program and who goes home, Williams announced to the assembled recruits. You'll be operating in squads of 5, dropped at different locations with limited supplies. Your mission is to reach a designated extraction point while completing several tactical objectives along the way. Maya felt her stomach tighten as the sergeant continued explaining the parameters. Each squad would face simulated enemy forces, navigate through treacherous terrain, and make life-or-death decisions with minimal resources. Physical strength, tactical knowledge, and mental toughness would all be tested to their absolute limits. Derek was practically glowing with excitement as the briefing continued. This was exactly the kind of challenge he had been training for his entire life. He flexed his muscles unconsciously and exchanged confident looks with Marcus and Jake. In his mind, this exercise would finally prove that Maya didn't belong with elite soldiers. The squads were given 24 hours to prepare their equipment and develop preliminary strategies. Maya spent most of this time studying topographical maps of the exercise area, memorizing landmarks, water sources, and potential hazards. She identified several routes that would avoid the most dangerous terrain while still allowing the squad to reach their objectives on schedule. Meanwhile, Derek focused on physical preparation and weapons maintenance. He cleaned his rifle with obsessive care, organized his ammunition, and did extra strength training to ensure he was in peak physical condition. His preparation was thorough, but it was the preparation of someone who planned to solve problems through superior firepower and physical dominance. When Maya tried to share her route analysis with the squad, she was met with the usual dismissive attitudes. Derek glanced at her carefully annotated maps for about 30 seconds before pushing them aside. "All this paper pushing isn't going to help when bullets start flying," he said. "We stick to the most direct routes and handle problems as they come up. That's how real soldiers operate." Sarah looked at Maya's maps over Derek's shoulder and was impressed by the level of detail and strategic thinking they represented. Maya had identified not just safe routes but also backup options, supply caches, and potential defensive positions. It was the work of someone who understood that successful military operations depended on careful planning and contingency thinking. "Derek, maybe we should consider some of these alternative routes," Sarah suggested. "Maya's found some paths that could keep us away from the main areas where enemy forces are likely to be concentrated." Derek's response was immediate and harsh. "Chen, don't start buying into Rodriguez's fantasy world. We're not going to tiptoe through the desert because someone's afraid of a little contact with the enemy. This is supposed to be elite training, not a nature hike." Marcus and Jake nodded in agreement, though Jake looked slightly uncertain. He had been watching Maya more carefully lately and had noticed that her suggestions often made sense even when they were unpopular. However, peer pressure and his desire to fit in with the stronger personalities in the group kept him from speaking up. The night before the exercise began, Maya lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling once again. She knew that this would be her final chance to prove herself, but she also knew that her squad was set up to fail. Derek's aggressive approach might work in some situations, but the desert environment would punish tactical mistakes mercilessly. She thought about her father, who had always told her that true leadership wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes, he had said, the best leaders are the ones who see what others miss and find ways to keep everyone safe. Maya had never fully understood what he meant, until now. The morning of the deployment arrived with brutal heat that promised to make the exercise even more challenging. Temperatures were expected to reach over 110 degrees Fahrenheit during the day, then drop to near freezing at night. Water would be scarce, and the terrain was filled with rocks, ravines, and hidden dangers that could injure or kill careless soldiers. As the helicopter carried Maya's squad toward their insertion point, she could see the vast expanse of desert stretching in all directions. The landscape looked alien and hostile, like the surface of another planet. She knew that somewhere out there, instructor teams were positioned to play the role of enemy forces, armed with paint rounds that would mark recruits as wounded or killed. Derek was studying the immediate area around their landing zone, planning what he called a shock and awe approach to their first objective. Maya was running through contingency scenarios in her mind, thinking about what could go wrong and how to adapt if their primary plan failed. The helicopter touched down in a cloud of dust and sand that temporarily blinded everyone. As soon as the recruits jumped out with their heavy packs, the aircraft lifted off and disappeared, leaving them alone in the hostile environment. The silence that followed was deafening after the noise of the helicopter engines. Derek immediately took charge, just as Maya had expected. "All right, people, we've got 6 hours of daylight left. We're going to move fast and hit our first objective before the enemy expects us. No fancy maneuvers, just direct action." Maya tried once more to present her route analysis, but Derek was already walking away, expecting the others to follow. Sarah gave Maya an apologetic look before shouldering her pack and joining the formation. Maya was left to bring up the rear, carrying equipment that was almost as heavy as she was. As they began moving across the desert terrain, Maya noticed things that her teammates missed: animal tracks that indicated water sources nearby, rock formations that provided natural cover from observation, wind patterns that would affect accuracy if they had to engage in long-range shooting. Her mind was constantly processing information and developing a comprehensive picture of their environment. Derek, focused on maintaining an aggressive pace, missed most of these details. He was navigating by compass bearing alone, choosing the most direct route regardless of terrain difficulties or tactical disadvantages. Within 2 hours, the squad was behind schedule, exhausted from climbing over rocks that could have been avoided, and dangerously low on water because they had passed 2 natural springs without Derek noticing them. The first major crisis was still ahead of them, but Maya could already see the signs that her squad was heading for disaster. The question was whether anyone would listen to her when it really mattered, or if her teammates' stubborn prejudices would lead them all into serious danger. By the second day of the exercise, Derek's aggressive leadership had led the squad into serious trouble. They had attempted to take their first objective using a direct frontal assault, just as Derek had planned. The result was catastrophic. Jake had been marked as killed by paint rounds from hidden instructors playing enemy forces, and Marcus was designated as severely wounded with a simulated leg injury that required him to be carried. The squad was now operating at half strength with their water supplies running dangerously low. Derek had refused to acknowledge Maya's earlier warnings about conservation, insisting that real soldiers didn't worry about minor discomforts. Now, with the desert sun beating down mercilessly and temperatures soaring past 115 degrees, everyone was feeling the effects of dehydration. Maya watched her teammates with growing concern. Derek was trying to maintain his commanding presence, but she could see the signs of heat exhaustion beginning to affect him. His skin was flushed, his movements were becoming sluggish, and he was making increasingly poor decisions about their route and tactics. Sarah was in better condition, but she was struggling under the weight of extra equipment she had taken from Jake's pack. Marcus, despite his simulated injury, was trying to keep up with the group and putting additional strain on everyone's resources. The squad was unraveling, and they still had 3 more days to survive in this hostile environment. When they stopped for a rest during the hottest part of the day, Maya decided to make one more attempt to assert some influence over their dire situation. She pulled out her annotated maps and approached Derek, who was sitting in whatever shade he could find, breathing heavily. "Derek, we need to change our approach," she said quietly, trying not to challenge his authority directly. "If we continue on this path, we're going to lose more people, and we won't complete the mission." Derek looked up at her with bloodshot eyes filled with frustration and wounded pride. "What exactly are you suggesting, Rodriguez? That we give up?" Maya knelt beside him and spread out her maps. "I'm suggesting we work smarter instead of harder. Look, there's a natural spring about 2 miles northeast of here. We can refill our water supplies and plan our next move from a position of strength instead of desperation." 2 miles in the wrong direction," Derek said dismissively. "That's not tactical thinking, that's cowardice." But Sarah had been listening, and she moved closer to examine Maya's maps. What she saw impressed her even more than before. Maya hadn't just identified water sources. She had mapped out enemy patrol patterns, identified optimal positions for observation and ambush, and developed multiple contingency plans for different scenarios. "Derek," Sarah said carefully, "maybe we should consider this. Maya's analysis is pretty thorough." Derek's face flushed with anger that had nothing to do with heat exhaustion. "Are you questioning my leadership, Chen? Because if you want Rodriguez to make the decisions, maybe you should have said something before we lost Jake." The accusation stung because Sarah knew it contained a grain of truth. She had been watching Derek make poor decisions for 2 days without speaking up forcefully enough. Her military training had conditioned her to respect the chain of command, even when she disagreed with orders. Maya could see that the situation was reaching a breaking point. Her squad was physically exhausted, demoralized, and turning against each other instead of working together to survive. If she didn't act soon, the exercise would end in complete failure, and possibly real injury or death. "Derek," she said, her voice firmer than it had been during the entire training program, "we can debate leadership later. Right now, we have a choice. We can continue doing what we've been doing, and probably fail the exercise, or we can try something different and maybe salvage the situation." Derek started to respond with another angry dismissal, but Marcus interrupted him. The wounded soldier had been listening to the entire exchange, and he was smart enough to recognize that their current approach wasn't working. "Man, I hate to say it, but Rodriguez might be right," Marcus said, wincing as he shifted his position. "I don't know how much longer I can keep moving in this heat without more water." For the first time since the exercise began, Derek looked uncertain. His confidence was being shaken by the obvious failure of his tactical approach and the growing support for Maya's alternative suggestions. He looked around at his exhausted teammates and seemed to finally grasp how desperate their situation had become. Maya sensed the shift in group dynamics and pressed her advantage carefully. The spring I identified is in a defensible position with good observation points. We can rest, rehydrate, and plan our approach to the next objective from there. It's not retreat, it's tactical repositioning. Sarah nodded enthusiastically. That makes sense to me. We're no good to anyone if we collapse from heatstroke. Derek was trapped between his pride and practical necessity. Every instinct told him to maintain his dominant position in the group, but he could see that his leadership was failing. His teammates were looking to Maya for solutions, something that would have been unthinkable just days before. After several long minutes of internal struggle, Derek made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. Fine, he said grudgingly. We'll try it your way, Rodriguez. But if this backfires, it's on you. Maya felt a mixture of relief and terror as she realized that her teammates were finally willing to listen to her ideas. She had been waiting for this opportunity throughout the entire training program, but now that it was here, the pressure was enormous. If her analysis was wrong or if her plans failed, she would bear the responsibility for the squad's failure. As they prepared to move toward the water source Maya had identified, she noticed that the group dynamic had shifted in subtle but important ways. Derek was still technically in charge, but he was no longer making unilateral decisions. Sarah was asking questions and offering suggestions. Even Marcus, despite his simulated injury, was contributing tactical insights based on his observations of enemy movement patterns. For the first time since the exercise began, the squad was functioning as a team rather than as a collection of individuals following Derek's commands. Maya had become an integral part of the group's decision-making process, and her teammates were beginning to see her as something other than a liability. The real test was still ahead of them, though. Maya's plans looked good on paper, but she had never had to execute complex tactical operations under the extreme stress of a survival situation. The next few hours would determine whether her careful analysis and strategic thinking could translate into practical success when lives were on the line. Maya's plan to reach the water source proved to be exactly what the squad needed. Following her carefully mapped route, they avoided 2 enemy patrol areas and reached the natural spring without incident. The clear, cool water was like a miracle after 2 days of rationing their supplies in the brutal desert heat. As the team refilled their canteens and rested in the shade of overhanging rocks, Maya continued studying the terrain ahead. Their next objective was the most challenging yet. They needed to retrieve intelligence from a heavily defended compound and then proceed to the extraction point, all while being hunted by multiple enemy teams. Derek had been unusually quiet since agreeing to follow Maya's guidance. He was struggling with the reality that his traditional leadership approach had nearly destroyed the squad, while Maya's careful analysis had potentially saved them. His pride was wounded, but he was beginning to understand that successful leadership sometimes meant knowing when to listen to others. Sarah was examining Maya's tactical notes with professional interest. What she saw was the work of someone who understood military operations at a level that went far beyond basic training. Maya had identified not just the obvious challenges, but also the subtle interconnections between terrain, timing, weather, and enemy capabilities. Maya, Sarah said, using her first name for the first time during the exercise, how did you figure out the enemy patrol schedules? Maya looked up from her maps, pleased to finally have someone showing genuine interest in her methods. I've been watching their movements since we were inserted. Most people follow predictable patterns even when they're trying to be random. I tracked their timing for 36 hours and found the gaps. Marcus, despite his simulated leg wound, was impressed by Maya's systematic approach. That's some serious intelligence work. Why didn't you mention this before? Maya glanced toward Derek before answering. I tried to, multiple times. But tactical analysis doesn't matter if nobody's willing to listen. Derek felt the implied criticism, but found he couldn't argue with it. Maya had been trying to contribute valuable intelligence throughout the exercise, but his preconceptions about her abilities had prevented him from taking her seriously. Now, when they were facing their most dangerous challenge, he was beginning to realize how much expertise he had dismissed. The compound they needed to infiltrate was positioned on high ground, with excellent fields of observation in all directions. Previous squads had attempted to approach it using stealth and speed, with mixed results. Maya's analysis suggested a completely different approach that would take longer, but had a much higher probability of success. The key is patience, Maya explained as she outlined her plan. Instead of trying to sneak past their observation points, we use them against them. If we can predict when and where they're looking, we can move during their blind spots. Her plan involved a complex sequence of movements timed to coincide with enemy patrol rotations and natural changes in lighting conditions. It required precise coordination and timing, but it would allow them to approach the compound from an unexpected direction while avoiding detection. Derek listened to the plan with growing amazement. Maya's tactical thinking was more sophisticated than anything he had learned in years of military training. She wasn't just planning to avoid the enemy. She was planning to manipulate their behavior and use their own defensive patterns against them. This could actually work, he admitted, though it clearly cost him something to say it. But it's going to require perfect execution from everyone. Maya nodded seriously. That's why we need to practice the timing sequences before we commit. One mistake could alert the entire compound. For the next several hours, the squad rehearsed Maya's plan using the terrain around the spring as a practice area. She had assigned specific roles to each team member based on their individual strengths and limitations. Derek would handle the actual intelligence retrieval because of his lock-picking skills. Sarah would provide overwatch and communications. Marcus would coordinate timing signals despite his limited mobility. Maya herself would serve as the tactical coordinator, using her understanding of enemy patterns to guide the team's movements in real time. It was a role that required constant observation and split-second decision-making, but she had proven that she could handle that kind of mental pressure. As they prepared to execute the plan, Derek pulled Maya aside for a private conversation. His expression was serious, and she could see that he was struggling with something internal. "Rodriguez," he began, then stopped and started over. "Maya, I owe you an apology. I've been treating you like you don't belong here, but you've probably saved our mission today." Maya was surprised by the admission. Throughout the training program, Derek had never shown any sign of self-reflection or willingness to acknowledge mistakes. She could see that this acknowledgement was difficult for him, which made it more meaningful. "We all have different strengths," she replied diplomatically. "The important thing is that we figure out how to work together." Derek nodded, but she could see that he wanted to say more. "When we get back, I'm going to make sure everyone knows what really happened out here. You deserve credit for keeping us together when my leadership was falling apart." The conversation was interrupted by Sarah's signal that it was time to begin their approach to the compound. Maya felt a mixture of nervousness and excitement as she realized that this would be her first chance to prove that her tactical abilities could work in a high-stakes situation. The squad moved out in formation, with Maya providing quiet guidance through hand signals and whispered instructions. Her timing calculations proved to be remarkably accurate as they navigated through the enemy's defensive perimeter without detection. Each movement was precise and purposeful, guided by her understanding of the patterns she had observed. As they reached the final approach to the compound, Maya could see the extraction point in the distance where helicopters would pick up any squads that successfully completed their mission. After days of doubt and humiliation, she was finally in a position to prove that intelligence and careful planning could be just as valuable as physical strength and aggressive tactics. The real test was about to begin, and for the first time since arriving at the training facility, Maya felt confident that her squad had a real chance of success. More importantly, she had finally earned the respect and trust of her teammates, something that no amount of physical training could have accomplished. Maya's infiltration plan unfolded with remarkable precision. Using her calculated timing sequences, the squad moved through the compound's defenses like shadows, avoiding every patrol and observation point exactly as she had predicted. Derek successfully retrieved the intelligence package while Sarah maintained overwatch from a concealed position. Marcus, despite his simulated injury, coordinated their movements with hand signals that kept everyone synchronized. When they emerged from the compound undetected, Derek looked at Maya with genuine admiration. "That was incredible tactical work," he said quietly. "I've never seen anything like it," but their celebration was premature. As they began moving toward the extraction point, Maya noticed something that made her blood run cold. The dust patterns in the distance indicated that multiple enemy teams were converging on their location. Someone had spotted them after all, and now they were being hunted by overwhelming forces. "We've got multiple contacts approaching from 3 directions," Maya whispered urgently. "They're trying to box us in before we reach the extraction zone." Derek's first instinct was to run directly toward the pickup point, but Maya grabbed his arm. If we take the direct route, they'll cut us off easily. We need to do something they won't expect. Maya quickly analyzed their options, considering the terrain, enemy positions, and their squad's limited capabilities. What she came up with was audacious and risky, but it was their only chance of reaching safety. "We're going to let them think they've trapped us," she explained rapidly. "Then we'll use their own tactics against them by breaking contact in the opposite direction and circling back to the extraction point." It was a complex maneuver that required split-second timing and absolute trust in Maya's analysis of enemy behavior. Derek looked at his teammates and saw determination in their eyes. After watching Maya's tactical skills save them repeatedly, they were ready to follow her lead completely. The plan worked perfectly. As enemy forces closed in on what they thought was the squad's position, Maya led her team through a series of concealed ravines that brought them to the extraction zone from an unexpected angle. They reached the pickup point just as helicopters were arriving. Having successfully completed their mission against overwhelming odds, Sergeant Williams was waiting at the landing zone as the helicopters touched down. He had been monitoring the exercise through radio communications and reconnaissance reports, tracking each squad's progress through the challenging course. What he had witnessed from Maya's squad was extraordinary. As the exhausted soldiers climbed out of the helicopter, Williams approached them with an expression that was difficult to read. Derek immediately stepped forward, expecting to give the standard mission debrief, but the sergeant held up his hand. "Before anyone says anything," Williams announced in his commanding voice, "I want to address something that happened during this exercise." The squad members exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether they were about to be praised or criticized. Williams turned his attention directly to Maya, who was standing quietly at the back of the group, still carrying equipment that was almost as heavy as she was. "Rodriguez, step forward." Maya's heart pounded as she moved to the front of the formation. After days of being treated as the squad's weakest link, she feared that Williams was about to confirm everyone's worst assumptions about her performance. Instead, the sergeant did something that shocked everyone present. "Ladies and gentlemen," he announced loud enough for other squads and instructors to hear, "I want you to understand what really happened out there over the past 5 days." Williams pulled out a tablet displaying tracking data and communication intercepts from the exercise. "Rodriguez here demonstrated some of the finest tactical analysis and strategic thinking I've seen in 20 years of military service. While other squads were failing their missions or barely scraping by, her planning and execution kept this team alive and mission capable." Derek felt his face burning with shame as Williams continued, "I monitored your radio communications and observed your movements through reconnaissance drones. Rodriguez identified enemy patterns that even our instructors didn't realize they were following. Her route planning avoided casualties that would have befallen any other approach." The sergeant's voice grew more intense as he addressed the broader group of assembled soldiers and instructors. "But here's what really impressed me. Despite being consistently ignored, dismissed, and blamed for others' failures, Rodriguez never gave up. She continued to provide life-saving tactical analysis even when her own teammates treated her like a burden." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes as she realized how badly they had misjudged their smallest squad member. Marcus was staring at Maya with newfound respect, understanding that her quiet observations and careful planning had literally saved their lives multiple times. Williams wasn't finished. During the final infiltration, Rodriguez's tactical coordination was flawless. The enemy forces were using randomized patrol patterns specifically designed to prevent the kind of analysis she performed. Yet she identified vulnerabilities that allowed for textbook infiltration without a single detection. Derek could barely bring himself to look at Maya as the full scope of his prejudice and poor leadership became clear to everyone present. He had been so focused on traditional displays of military prowess that he had completely failed to recognize genuine tactical brilliance, and when multiple enemy teams attempted to trap your squad during extraction, Williams continued, Rodriguez developed and executed a deception plan that turned the enemy's numerical advantage against them. That kind of innovative thinking under pressure is exactly what we need in special operations. Maya stood perfectly still, overwhelmed by the public recognition after days of humiliation and self-doubt. She had never expected this kind of vindication, and she wasn't sure how to process the dramatic reversal in how she was being perceived. Williams addressed the entire group of recruits and instructors. This exercise revealed something important about how we evaluate military potential. Physical strength and aggressive tactics have their place, but they mean nothing without intelligence, adaptability, and strategic thinking. He turned back to Maya specifically. Rodriguez, your performance during this exercise was exceptional. You demonstrated exactly the kind of capabilities we need in elite units. More importantly, you showed the character and determination to keep fighting for your team even when they didn't appreciate your contributions. Derek finally found his voice, though it came out quieter than usual. Sergeant, I need to say something. Williams nodded for him to continue. I was wrong about Rodriguez. About everything. She saved our mission and probably our lives multiple times. I let my prejudices blind me to what she was actually capable of. Williams looked at Derek with a mixture of disappointment and approval. Martinez, recognizing your mistakes is part of becoming a better leader. But the damage you did to squad cohesion and Rodriguez's confidence could have had serious consequences in a real combat situation. Sarah stepped forward as well. Sergeant, I should have spoken up sooner. I could see that Maya's ideas were good, but I was too worried about squad politics to support her when it mattered. Williams nodded gravely. Chen, that's an honest assessment. Military leadership sometimes requires the courage to challenge poor decisions, even when it's uncomfortable. As other squads gathered around to hear the debrief, Maya realized that word of her performance was spreading quickly through the training facility. Soldiers who had dismissed her just days before were now looking at her with curiosity and respect. The bottom line, Williams announced to everyone present, is that Rodriguez demonstrated why diversity of thinking and background makes military units stronger. Her success wasn't despite her differences from traditional soldiers. It was because of them. Maya felt a profound sense of vindication as she looked around at her fellow recruits. The mockery and dismissal she had endured throughout training had been replaced by genuine respect and admiration. More importantly, she had proven to herself that her unique strengths had real value in military operations. Derek approached her as the formal debrief concluded. Maya, I don't know if you can forgive how I treated you, but I want you to know that I learned something important from working with you. I hope we get the chance to serve together again, because I'd be honored to have you on my team. As the sun set over the Nevada desert, Maya Rodriguez stood among her fellow soldiers as an equal, for the first time since arriving at the training facility. She had endured weeks of doubt and humiliation, but she had emerged as a proven tactical expert whose contributions had saved lives and completed an impossible mission. The small soldier, who had been mocked for her size and quiet demeanor, had demonstrated that true military excellence comes in many forms, and that the most valuable warriors are often the ones who think differently from everyone else.